The sun didn't rise so much as it bled across the desert sky, spilling itself in orange and copper over the canyon floor. Wind skimmed across the rocks, dry and whispering, and somewhere beneath that vastness, where silence crouched like a forgotten dog, a man was tied to a rock. He wasn't dead. Not yet. But his skin had cracked under the sun's cruel eye, lips split, wrists bound too tight, throat so dry no words came when he tried to speak. His knees had buckled long ago, his head sagged forward. A shadow moved beside him, small, flickering, and desperate. A girl. No older than 6. Dirt on her cheeks. Dust in her curls. She wore a ragged calico dress that clung to her thin frame like a whisper of a past too harsh for such small shoulders. She didn't cry anymore. She'd already spent the tears. Instead, she walked with resolve, her tiny hands trembling as she climbed down from the outcrop and set off toward the town below. That town had no name worth remembering. A crooked line of buildings leaned against the wind, saloon, stable, church with its steeple broken. Folks didn't look each other in the eye there. Everyone owed something, and no one gave anything for free. When the girl entered, nobody paid her mind. Just another orphan wandering too close to danger. Until she spoke. "Please help. My daddy's tied to a rock. Please." Her voice cracked, her lip trembling from thirst or fear, no one could tell. A man with grease-slick hair laughed from behind a whiskey glass. A woman shook her head and turned away. The barkeep grunted and muttered something about lies and ghost stories. But someone was listening. From the porch of the saddlery, a woman watched. She sat still, hands folded, eyes narrowed against the morning light. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Just studied the girl like someone recognizing a dream they used to have. Her name was Emma. She'd lived 22 years, but most days she felt far older. She had a scar near her collarbone she never spoke of, hands that had learned to work harder than her heart was ever allowed to, and a voice she rarely used because no one had ever cared to hear it. Emma stood. She didn't ask questions. Didn't doubt. She walked across the street with her skirts brushing dust and boots worn to silence. When she reached the girl, she knelt down slow, gentle, as if approaching a startled fawn. "Where is he?" The girl blinked. Pointed. Emma didn't ask for names. She didn't need to know who tied the man, or why. She saw the filth on the girl's feet, the sunburn peeling her ears, and she knew enough. Some things didn't require explaining. Some wounds spoke louder than words. She brought out her mule, a stubborn old thing named Wren, and packed a canteen, rope, and 2 blankets. She left a note on her door, though no one would read it. Just a habit from a life that once included someone who cared. The girl rode up front, clinging to Emma's waist. They didn't speak much on the trail. Wind hissed through dry branches. A crow followed them, then vanished. The farther they went, the more the land turned to bone, white rocks, brittle brush, sun-stained emptiness. They found him in a basin where the land dipped like a cradle carved by forgotten gods. The man was still alive, barely. Skin blistered. Breathing shallow. His arms dangled at odd angles, tied behind the rock like a broken marionette. Emma slid off the mule. She handed the girl a tin cup with water and knelt beside the man. She didn't touch him at first. Just watched the slow rise and fall of his chest. A memory stirred, another man, another time, but she buried it. She reached for her knife. The rope was rough, old, stained with blood where it had dug into flesh. It took effort to cut, and when the last strand snapped, the man collapsed into her arms like a sack of exhausted breath. His lips moved. She leaned close. "Go, why'd you come?" Emma's brow furrowed, but she said nothing. She dragged him from the rock into a strip of shadow offered by a crooked bluff. Her arms burned with the weight, but she didn't stop. When she laid him down, his eyes fluttered open for a moment. Blue, or maybe gray, it was hard to tell beneath the swelling. The girl nestled beside him, her small hand pressed to his chest. He moved one arm, barely, and placed it over hers. That was when he wept. No sound. Just tears that soaked into sun-scorched dust and vanished like they'd never been. Emma pulled out the blanket, draped it over them both, and unscrewed the canteen. He wouldn't drink at first. His mouth had forgotten how. She pressed water to his lips with a rag, patient, careful. Bit by bit, he swallowed. The sun crawled across the sky. When it dipped low enough to paint everything in gold, Emma stood and walked to the edge of the bluff. From there, she could see the distant shimmer of town, the windmill turning slowly. She didn't miss it. She never had. The girl came to her side. "Will he die?" Emma didn't answer. She looked back at the man, his chest now rising steady, the color returning to his lips. Not today. They built a small shelter from branches and Emma's coat. It wasn't much, but it would do. She started a fire with flint and dry grass, and when night came, it warmed the man's feet, though he still shivered like something chased him in dreams. He slept with a frown. Even in rest, he looked like he'd never been taught peace. The girl slept fast, curled in Emma's arms like a pup. She mumbled in her dreams. Emma stroked her hair, humming a tune she hadn't remembered she knew until now. Above them, stars spilled across the sky. The moon was a thin silver blade. Emma didn't sleep. She stared into the fire, her hands wrapped around her knees, and listened to the wind carry distant howls. Coyotes. Maybe wolves. Maybe memories. She didn't know what the man had done. Didn't know who left him tied to die beneath a pitiless sun. Didn't ask. All she knew was that a girl's voice had broken through the silence, and something inside her had answered. Not because she was kind. Not because she was brave. But because, once, a long time ago, she'd wished for someone to come. And no one had. Now, she would be that someone. For this man. For this child. For herself. The fire cracked softly. Far off, thunder rumbled behind the hills, dry thunder, with no promise of rain. Emma stared at the horizon. Whatever storm was coming, they'd face it together. And the rope that once bound him to death would not hold them now. Morning crawled in slow over the desert, painted in bruised purple and soft amber, the kind of light that didn't promise warmth, just truth. A stillness hung over the makeshift camp, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the breath of 3 living things that hadn't yet figured out if they trusted the day. Emma was already awake. She hadn't slept much. Not with the man lying close by, still more shadow than substance. His skin was blistered from days under that brutal sun, face half hidden by stubble and dust. The blanket she'd wrapped around him had slipped in the night, revealing the deep bruises across his ribs, like someone had tried to beat the life from his body before tying it to stone. She crouched beside him again, moving slow. She poured a little more water into the rag, placed it at his mouth. His lips twitched, then parted. This time he drank without prompting. His eyes opened fully, clear for the first time. Emma didn't speak. Neither did he. They watched each other like old wolves, each deciding if the other was still dangerous. The child stirred behind them, curled beneath Emma's coat. Her lashes fluttered, and when she sat up, her hand went immediately to the man's arm. He grunted in pain, but didn't pull away. She leaned her head into his chest, the way a child does when the world's too big and the only anchor is flesh and heartbeat. Emma stood and turned her back, giving them that quiet. She tended the fire, tore a strip of cloth from her petticoat to dress the worst of his wounds. Her hands worked from memory, old motions from an older life. The man finally found his voice. "You shouldn't have come." Emma didn't look at him. And yet I did. He watched her for a long while, eyes narrowed against the pain. His voice was low, gravel-scarred. "You don't know who I am." "No," she said, wringing the cloth clean, "but I saw what was done to you. That was enough." The girl climbed into his lap, careful of his ribs. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered something only he could hear. His hand rose and rested on her back, trembling but steady. Emma didn't ask if she was his daughter. She didn't need to. That bond wasn't forged by blood alone, it was made in the long spaces between fear and trust. Later that morning, she left the fire and walked to the edge of the ridge. From there she could see dust trails rising on the horizon. Someone was out riding. She squinted, body tensing. But they were too far to tell friend from foe, so she went back to her place by the fire without comment. The man tried to sit up but hissed in pain. She helped him gently, placing rolled-up canvas beneath his back. "I don't remember your name," he said, voice hoarse. "I never gave it." He raised an eyebrow. "Emma." He nodded once. "James." They sat like that for a while, Emma, James, and the child, whose name still hadn't been offered and hadn't yet been asked. Some things would come in time. James leaned his head back. "It was Hank." Emma said nothing. He continued, haltingly. "We rode together. Built fences. Drove cattle. He said he'd look out for me, after I left the claim. Said the past was buried." Emma's eyes stayed on the fire. "But he showed up with 3 others," James went on. "Said I'd run for more than just land. Said I owed them blood for what I'd seen, what I'd walked away from." "And you didn't?" Emma asked, not unkindly. James shook his head, face tightening. "I'd seen enough blood for 10 lifetimes. I was done with that." The child reached up and brushed dirt from his shirt. He looked down at her and smiled, barely, but it was there. A crack in the stone. Emma finally spoke again. "So they tied you to the rock and left you for the sun." James nodded. "Said the desert could decide what I was worth." Emma stirred the fire, watching the smoke rise. Cowards always let the earth do what they don't have the spine to finish. They shared silence again, thick and knowing. A wind picked up, dry as always, rustling through brittle sage. Later, Emma climbed the ridge again and spotted someone coming. A rider. One. Not Hank. Not the others. It was Ellis Harper, the rancher who worked the edge of the mesa, the type of man who could fix a fence and shoot a rattler with the same calm blink. He dismounted and tipped his hat. Heard someone was screaming for help in town yesterday. Figured it wasn't coyotes. Emma didn't smile. Wasn't. He looked past her toward the fire below. Is that James Rivers? She gave a small nod. I heard he ran out on a blood debt. Emma folded her arms. I heard folks die every day for less. Ellis studied her, lips tight. You know what happens if the sheriff hears he's still alive? I imagine it involves a noose. Ellis kicked dust with the toe of his boot, silent for a moment. You aiming to protect him? Emma met his gaze. I'm aiming to see a man recover before someone decides his grave should be deeper than his story. Ellis chewed that over. You're a strange one, Emma. So I've been told. He tipped his hat again, then swung back onto his horse. Storm's coming next week. Maybe sooner. Watch your fire lines. She watched him ride off without another word. That night, James ate a little broth. Emma crushed dried rabbit root and mixed it into the stew to help with the fever that still threatened to climb. She didn't ask what else he'd done, or who he used to be. That didn't matter, not yet. What mattered was that his hands no longer shook when the child pressed herself against him, and that his eyes no longer looked for an escape. He was settling, like soil after a flood. Emma sat close by, carving notches into a stick? One for every hour he'd stayed alive. 23 and counting. He glanced at her. You believe in redemption? Emma's knife paused. I believe in survival. He nodded slowly. That's a kind of redemption. The fire dimmed. The moon climbed. The girl had fallen asleep against James's side, breathing softly, face clean now, free of tears. James brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. His voice, when it came, was almost ashamed. She's not mine by blood. Her mother, she took her own life last winter. I found the girl wandering near the riverbed. Emma didn't respond for a long time. Finally, she said, she looks at you like you're the whole sky. He exhaled, trembling. I never wanted to be anyone's sky. Just didn't want her to grow up under storms. Emma nodded. James turned his head toward her. Why'd you help us? She didn't answer. Instead, she added another notch to her stick. Let the silence grow thick again, like smoke after a flame dies down. Then, soft as breath, she whispered, because no one helped me. The wind carried her words away, but they left something behind, an understanding. A bond made not of rope, but of memory. Not of pity, but of shared ache. By the time the fire burned low, James had fallen asleep again, this time with a steadier breath. The child curled tight into his side. Emma stayed awake, eyes wide in the dark. She knew this wasn't the end. Folks didn't leave men to die and forget about it the next day. Someone would come looking. Someone would ask questions. But tonight, she allowed herself a brief moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring dust and reckoning. But tonight, the rope was gone. And for the first time in a long while, rain didn't feel like an impossibility, it just felt late. The days that followed unfolded like thread through a slow needle, measured, quiet, sometimes fraying, but always moving forward. James didn't heal fast. The sun had taken more than skin, it had stolen strength, memory, and something deeper, some corner of faith a man only realizes he's lost when he tries to lean on it and falls. Emma stayed. She hauled water from the creek, boiled herbs, stitched wounds. She taught the girl how to keep the fire breathing through cold mornings and still nights. No one ever asked for thanks. That wasn't how things worked in this kind of country. Gratitude lived in small things, the way James handed her his tin cup before she asked, the way the girl smiled again, even if only in sleep. They built a rhythm, the three of them. A little camp tucked between rock and silence. And yet, even as his body began to mend, James never asked to leave. He could walk now, slow and stiff, one arm still slack at the elbow. But he didn't pack. He didn't point to the horizon and say he had to get moving. He just sat beside the fire, sharpening a stick, watching the child draw pictures in the dirt with a scrap of coal. Emma noticed. Of course she did. One morning, as the girl slept with a strand of Emma's hair clutched in her fingers, Emma stood and crossed to where James leaned against a sun-warmed boulder. You're well enough to ride, she said. He nodded. I am. You don't plan to. No. Silence. She folded her arms, the desert wind tugging at her skirt. Why? James didn't answer at first. His gaze wandered to the child's sleeping form. Then it shifted to Emma, not directly at her, but near her, as if looking too hard might make her vanish. I was headed nowhere when they found me, he said finally. Running from what I'd done, from what I'd become. And what was that? Someone I hated. Emma sat on a rock nearby. Her shoulders were square, but her voice had softened. You still running? He shook his head. Not anymore. Because of her? She asked, glancing toward the child. James hesitated. Partly. Emma waited. He looked at her then. Really looked. But mostly because you didn't run. When everyone else turned their backs, you stayed. That sort of thing, it changes a man. She didn't speak. Just watched the wind move across the dry grass, thinking how rarely kindness survives in men who've seen too much. He reached for a twig and twisted it in his hands. You asked why I won't leave. I don't have anywhere to go that's not poisoned by who I used to be. But here. He gestured around them. The cracked earth, the shade of their little shelter, the smoke curling up from last night's coals. Here, no one calls me a coward. No one looks at me like I'm filth. Not even her. Emma followed his gaze. The girl was stirring now, rubbing her eyes, murmuring for water. Emma rose and handed her the cup. She didn't respond to James's confession. Not with words. But she didn't walk away, either. Later that day, as the sun climbed higher, James helped Emma reinforce the shelter walls. His strength had returned in short bursts, and his hands, though clumsy, were steady. The girl hummed while she gathered kindling, unaware, or perhaps perfectly aware, that this quiet was something new for all of them. That evening, as the fire snapped and dusk spread its long blue arms across the sky, James told her the rest. She wasn't mine, her mama. Not legally. Not in the way that counted. I'd loved her once, but we weren't right. Not really. I was too distant, and she was too tired of waiting for me to become someone good. Emma listened, eyes low. She took her life after her brother died, he continued. Left the girl in my care. Not by law. Not by blood. Just trust. Emma poked the fire, watching sparks drift up like tiny prayers. And you ran. I tried to raise her. But I was broken. I drank too much. Fought too often. Then I saw something I shouldn't have, some land men wanted buried under violence and lies. I told the truth once. That's what got me hunted. She looked up. You think it was worth it? He thought long and hard before answering. Yes. The child had fallen asleep again. Her hand gripped James's shirt like it anchored her to earth. He placed his own hand atop hers, slow and reverent. I've been tired a long time, Emma, he said. But for the first time, I'm not tired of trying. That night, she didn't sleep far from him. Not beside, not touching, but closer than before. Close enough to see the way his chest rose evenly, the way his eyes flickered in dreams but didn't flinch. The next morning, she found him sharpening the blade of her knife with a care that surprised her. The child was laughing near the creek, stacking stones into crooked towers. Emma watched him for a moment, then stepped close. You're not the man I thought you were when I cut you down. I'm not even the man I thought I was, he replied. A beat. Will you stay? The question was out before she could stop it. And once spoken, it felt heavier than she'd intended. It wasn't an invitation, it was a truth laid bare, vulnerable and tender in the rising light. James didn't answer right away. He slid the knife back into its sheath, placed it gently on the blanket. I'll stay as long as you'll let me. Emma nodded, looking out toward the horizon. Then we'll need more wood. I'll chop it. You can't raise your arm past your shoulder. I'll manage. And he did, awkward, slow, but he split kindling that afternoon while Emma showed the girl how to roast potatoes over coals without burning them to ash. The firelight caught their faces, framed them in soft gold. That evening, thunder rolled far off, distant, hollow, more rumor than promise. Still, Emma looked to the sky. It hadn't rained in weeks. Maybe months. But something in the air had shifted. The smell. The weight. A hush that made the coyotes stay quiet. Even the wind held its breath. Later, long after the girl had been tucked into her blanket and the fire had sunk low, Emma stood watching the clouds crawl across the stars. James came up beside her, hand gently resting against the ridgepole of their shelter. Rain? He asked. She shook her head. Not yet. But it's close. He studied her profile, the way her mouth tightened when she thought, the way her eyes softened when she looked toward the child's sleeping figure. Emma, he said carefully, do you think you'll ever trust me? She turned to him then, slow and quiet, her voice like wind through willow. I already do. That's the part that scares me. He smiled. Not a wide smile. Just enough. She didn't smile back. But she didn't look away either. In the stillness between them, something passed that didn't need to be named, something that had taken root without either of them noticing. Not love. Not yet. But something deeper, something ready to grow if the rain ever came. The fire hissed softly. The night wrapped around them, not cold but solemn. And just before they turned in, a single drop of water struck the dust between their boots and vanished. The morning air carried the scent of wet stone, though the rain had vanished by dawn. It had come in silence, just a kiss of water on the dust, not enough to soak, not enough to stay. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, like a long breath held in the chest of the earth. James rose early, his body aching less than the days before. He moved slower than he wanted, but his steps no longer betrayed him. The child clung to his hand as they walked the ridge together, her laugh echoing between the stone walls like birdsong in a long empty canyon. Emma watched from below, hands buried in damp soil. She was planting seeds in a line, each movement deliberate. There was little hope they'd taken this land, but she planted them anyway. Not because she believed they would grow, but because she believed she should try. By midday, they'd finished reinforcing the shelter's roof. James had taken to carving new poles, driven by quiet purpose. Emma still said little, but her silences had softened. Where before she'd built distance with stillness, now she simply shared it. That afternoon, a dust trail rose beyond the far ridge. Emma saw it first. She stood slowly, eyes narrowing, hand resting on the handle of her knife. James followed her gaze, and his breath caught. "They're coming," he said. She didn't ask how he knew. The way his voice hollowed was answer enough. 3 riders, maybe 4. Coming fast, straight through the scrubland. There was no hesitation in their path. No pause to question. Emma grabbed the child and tucked her behind a rock wall. "Stay down," she whispered. "No matter what." James limped forward. "I can talk to them." Emma caught his arm. "And say what? That you changed? They don't care." "They'll care if I die," he said grimly. The riders came in hard, horses kicking up gravel and sun. At the front was a man with a black hat and a scar down his left cheek. Hank. He reined in first, spitting into the dirt. "Well, I'll be damned. Look at you, still breathing." James stepped forward. "You came all this way to finish what the sun couldn't?" "Didn't reckon on the girl screaming through town," Hank drawled, nodding toward the shelter. "Didn't reckon on the bleeding heart that cut you loose neither." His eyes landed on Emma. She didn't flinch. One of the other riders, a younger man with a twitchy hand, reached for the rifle at his side. Emma already had hers leveled. "No," she said, voice flat. "Easy now," Hank raised both hands. "Ain't no need for shooting." "Then get back on your horses," she replied. Hank laughed. "You don't get it, miss. We can't have him alive. Too many mouths talkin'. Too many folks remember what he saw." James's jaw tightened. "I told the truth. That land was never yours. You buried people to claim it. And you were meant to stay buried with M," Hank snapped. Emma stepped closer, rifle steady. "He's not dying here." Hank looked at her long and slow. "You willing to kill for him?" Emma didn't answer. Her silence was louder than a gunshot. "All right," Hank said, flicking his reins. "We'll take the girl instead. Maybe that'll settle the account." The child let out a whimper from behind the rock. James stepped in front of her, teeth clenched. "You touch her and I'll—" "You'll what?" Hank sneered. "Fall over?" In a heartbeat, the twitchy rider raised his rifle. Emma fired first. The shot rang out like thunder cracked open. The man dropped from his saddle, rifle tumbling to the dust. The horses spooked. One reared, and another rider shouted, grabbing the reins. Hank's horse danced beneath him, and his hand went for his pistol, but James was already moving. He lunged, grabbed the rifle from the fallen man, and aimed. The tremble in his arms was gone now. Whatever weakness remained was burned away by something deeper. Not hate. Not vengeance. Just the refusal to lose again. Hank froze. "You gonna shoot me, James?" he called. "No," James said, voice steady. "But I'll make damn sure you ride out of here with a limp." The 2 remaining riders glanced at each other. Emma's rifle was still raised, her eye calm. The child stood behind her now, her hands clenched into fists, silent but unafraid. Hank spit again, this time in the dirt at his own feet. "Fine. Keep your ghost story. You'll be hunted for it, you know." James stepped closer. "Then send better men next time." Hank turned his horse, the others following. They rode off without another word, dust curling behind them like the tail of a snake. The desert fell silent again. Emma lowered her rifle. Her hands shook only after it was done. James exhaled long and hard. His legs buckled, and he sat down in the dirt, laughing in disbelief. The girl ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. He held her tight. Emma walked to them, sat on her heels. "You all right?" He nodded. "Yeah. I think I am." She looked toward the horizon, where the riders had vanished. "They'll come again," she said. James looked at her. "Then I guess we'd better stay ready." They packed what little they had the next morning, moved down to a lower canyon where the trees grew taller and the shadows held cooler ground. There, they found a stream and cleared space for something new. Emma built a garden again. This time, she believed it might grow. James found wood enough to build a fence, to frame a home. His body still bore marks of what had been done to him, but his steps were sure. The girl chased lizards in the grass and returned to them with mud on her cheeks and sunlight in her eyes. Weeks passed. One evening, as the sky burned itself into dusk, James stood beside Emma as she watered the new sprouts. "I never said thank you," he murmured. She didn't look at him. "I didn't ask you to. But I owe you more than that." She smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything, James. You chose to live. That was your doing." He hesitated. "Then maybe we could keep choosing." She looked up at him. "I mean," he went on, "this life. This little place. You, me, her. If it's not too late for a man like me." Emma reached out, touched his hand. "We're all late for something. But that doesn't mean we can't still arrive." The wind stirred the grass. The garden held its breath. And somewhere beneath the dust, fire still burned, not wild, not destructive. Just enough to warm a home. Just enough to keep going. They stood together, not as two broken people, but as three souls who had refused to disappear. And when the rain finally came, soft, slow, steady, it did not wash anything away. It only made what was buried begin, at last, to bloom.